Canada's 13 premiers are in Washington for 2 days, where they will make the case to U.S. lawmakers that the 25% tariffs proposed by the U.S. president will be harmful to the economies of both countries. Here's Ontario Premier Doug Ford speaking to business leaders at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Let's stop wasting time and energy and effort fighting each other, threatening tariffs that will only hurt workers, hurt businesses, and cost more for families, hurting hard-working people just looking to get ahead in life. Instead, let's focus on restoring the pride of Made in the USA and Made in Canada. Let's be unapologetic as we stand up for American and Canadian workers. Today, let's usher in the new American and Canadian century, a new golden age. Let's build Fortress Amcan.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford making his speech in Washington as U.S. President Donald Trump's shifting tariff threats continue to dominate Canadian politics. On February 3rd, Canada had secured a pause of at least 30 days on broad-based tariffs. CPAC's Michael Serapio has been asking former premiers what Canadian officials should be doing in this 30-day period. Here's what they told us last week.
How do you think Canadian officials, federal, provincial, how do you think they should be using this period of pause before we kind of come up with some type of action?
Well, I believe, and I know that this will be the case. There's no time for making an assumption that this is over. I think that this 30 days has to be used to make sure that we have a very coordinated plan for what happens after the 30 days if the threat of the tariffs comes back. That is the work that needs to be done now. And to my point about coordinated response, I think that these 30 days should also be used to make sure that we have everybody in the tent, so that if the threat does come back, there isn't a scramble to get everyone on the same page. We really do have to be Team Canada. That can't just be a slogan. It has to be the reality of how we approach this very unpredictable president.
When it comes to advice for government leaders, federal, provincial, territorial, what would your advice be to them in this moment as they try to deal with the Trump administration?
My advice would be to stay in close communication with each other, to make sure that information was shared, to make sure that whatever proposals are bubbling up in our own bureaucracies in province and territories, that we share those, that we see if we can find common ground in terms of the strategies that we put forward, and make sure that we, as I said before, that we're on the same page and that we're supporting the federal government in their attempts, and that we communicate with the federal government, because nobody wants surprises in a situation like this. We all want to know what each of us is going to be saying, so that we can have a coordinated approach.
So how do you want officials here in Canada to use this 30-day pause? What's left of it?
Well, what we better not do as a country is go back to sleep. What the crisis with the Trump administration has underscored is how vulnerable we have become as a country. We took for granted our privileged access to the world's largest economy through NAFTA. We can't take that for granted any longer. We took for granted the need to be productive. We've seen this 2-3 decade long decline in our productivity. We're now going on 3 years with a steep decline in per capita GDP, which is our wealth. We just got a kick in the pants this past week with the Trump tariff threats. Let's use that to fix our own internal problems that are holding back Canada from a more prosperous future. A lot of people, I've talked about energy infrastructure. That's absolutely critical. Getting our tax system back to attracting rather than rather than disincentivizing investment and savings and work. And finally, it means, as many have commented, on achieving the dream of the economic union in Canada by knocking down the remaining barriers to interprovincial trade and mobility in goods, services, and labor. A lot of that is a boring, grinding piece of work, which is regulatory harmonization. Nobody's ever going to win a vote or an election promising interprovincial regulatory harmonization. It's a very wonky issue. But there's one thing we could do to get big gains on that right away, which would be an agreement between the provinces to recognize each other's regs. So you would have a reciprocal recognition of all the provinces' regs of professionals, labor market, transportation, you name the industry. There might be some things where you have to allow for exceptions, but they should be very rare. And we need to get cooking with gas on that.
Now, before you and I are done, Mr. Dexter, I also want to get your thoughts on the threatened Trump tariffs. We now have this 30-day pause while Canada meets some of the demands being made out of Washington. I'm wondering what you think Canada should be doing during this 30-day period as we possibly look at the tariffs finally being installed.
Well, I mean, this has been said many times, and it's often been ignored, which is we should be diversifying our markets, and we should not be hostage, to a single country. And we negotiated and signed the comprehensive European trade arrangement now some years ago. I don't believe that that has been treated with the seriousness that it needed to be treated with on either side, either from the European side or from the Canadian side. But obviously, there is another market in Europe for Canadian products, especially in Atlantic Canada, where it's a much nearer market for us. But it needs to be. We just need to diversify that market to the extent that we can, and some serious attention has to be spent with it. I know there are those out there who will say that it's a pipe dream to think that you're going to be able to diversify enough to be able to significantly wean the country off of its dependence on the U.S. But that doesn't mean there will always be a great volume of trade across the border. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take every protective measure we can to not find ourselves in the position that we're in now.
Diversification, regardless of what we do, will be the lesson that we will take from this current trade and tariff dispute that we're seeing with the U.S. I think there's a lesson for us to learn, and we should not forget those lessons, but yet continue to work very closely with our biggest and best trading partner, and that being the United States. It is not always as simple as one might think either. It's just where we are, the cost of getting goods to the new customer or the new country, as an example, will be difficult. So security issues will also come into play here, sometimes even just legislation. So we've had a good relationship from the U.S., but we've learned a lesson now based on these last few months that we should never take that for granted. And if there are other markets out there that we need to exploit and work with, let's not forget the lessons that we learned in recent days.